All right, welcome to the Outlaw Radio Show. My name is Zach Adams, and I pastor a church located just outside of Athens, Georgia. The name of the church is Calvary 316. If you're local, come hang out with us one Sunday morning. Our service is at 10:30. We're called Calvary 316 because it was at Calvary that God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. Also helps we're off of Highway 316, so it's a little bit of a play on words. See how that works. If you're not local but looking for a good Bible teaching church, you can check out online. We live stream our service. Easiest place to find us is our YouTube channel, which is Calvary 316 .live. We are streaming on multiple platforms. We are streaming on the Outlaw Radio.live page on YouTube. We're streaming on Facebook.com/The Radio Outlaw. We are also streaming on my X account, which is Zach_Adams. So we're streaming on 3 different places. And then tomorrow, the audio of tonight's episode will be released on Apple, Google, Spotify, all the places that you find your podcasting. I'm joined in studio by 2 regulars and a friend. I've got Spice Daddy here to my right, the far end of the table. I got Pope Creighton Vaughn. How you doing, Pope C?
Doing well. It's another day.
It's another day. And we also have a dear friend of ours from the church, Steve Hamilton, who will be sharing his story, his journey with Jesus. We'll get to you in a second, Steve. First, Cray, anything I might have missed in the introduction of how this dysfunctional show works?
Basically, one of the things that we do is because we are live streaming a recording, we will be putting that out, like Zach said. That'll go out tomorrow morning, tomorrow afternoon, depending on how busy I am at work. If you are watching live, you can get in the comments on either Facebook and YouTube or X, which Justin, Spice Daddy over there,
I'm in the live chat now.
Monitoring. And if you have questions, comments, concerns, let us know how you feel about what we're saying. You can also email us at, hold on, we have a thing for this. You can email us at...
You're working on it. It's coming. On it. It's
you
coming.
Can email us at popecreighton@gmail.com. You can also text Zach directly at the number at the bottom of the screen, 678-438-9202. And if you text us, he will get it immediately.
Yes.
He's a lot better at interrupting himself than we are. So if you want to make sure that it gets on the show, texting him is your best option.
Yeah, sometimes when you drop a comment in any of the video threads, the internet's weird. So sometimes we see them, sometimes they pop up later. Especially like Facebook's the worst. Facebook, yes. There's such a delay to Facebook, which is probably the platform that there's most interaction with. It's just weird how it functions, which is why we throw out the phone number. Easiest way to get a comment onto the show. Again, Creighton, you want to throw that back up, 678-438-9202. If you are listening to the podcast and something hits you and you want to share a thought, a praise report, if you want to just reach out and let us know who you are, where you're listening from, we'd love to hear from you. And again, that's popecreighton@gmail.com, the official email address of the Outlaw Radio Show. Also, the official email address of Calvary 316 Church, which is funny. Spice Daddy, how you doing, man? How are things with you?
Pretty good. Getting ready for this trip in February.
That's right.
Taking 3 of the regulars from the show.
That's true. We'll be off that week, that Wednesday.
Right.
We won't
Unless you want to go with us and we film live from down there.
No, not going to happen. So you guys, y'all will be going visiting our brother.
Maybe one day.
Kenneth, no doubt. I need to actually give a quick shout out. If you faithfully plugged an Amazon Christmas for months leading up to Christmas, which is a book that my wife wrote. I got to give there are 2 Karens that are big fans of the show. There's the second favorite Karen, not in order of significance, but Church Karen Dotson, our good friend, our resident PhD of the show. But your number 1 famous Karen is your mother.
Yes, correct.
And I just need, and she watches the show, and so I just need to publicly say the rye bread that she made is the best rye bread I've ever eaten in my life. It was delicious. Right before the show, my wife made Reuben sandwiches for the family. I've got an extra one in the microwave because I didn't want to eat too much before the show. Karen, the rye bread was out of this world. So thank you very much. Very, very, very good. So kudos to your mom.
You don't have to tell me.
You made the comment your mom makes bread, but you got her, what did you get her for Christmas?
No, this was, okay, so
for Christmas.
So years ago, I like to
Get gifts that self-serve.
I love to give gifts, but when you see a talent in somebody, it's good to give gifts that are self-serving, like you said. So I like to take credit for giving my mother her first bread machine, and she's had many since. This was years ago, and then this year I was just like, because
what goes good with bread,
right?
Butter.
And for like a good 10 years, I wasn't around for Christmas or so.
That was when you were
5 to 6,
traveling
7
the
years,
world, right?
Yeah, I was traveling the world. Wasn't in the States for Christmas. And then this year, I was just like, need to step up my game. Been making bread a lot. Got her a butter maker.
Yeah, that's
so
sounds incredible.
Yeah, so you gotta be selfish sometimes.
Yeah,
giving gifts.
Give gifts that give.
Yeah.
That's a good motto. I was reminded of something about the show, and this will be a great transition into Steve and his story and what we're going to do with tonight's episode. Jessica and I had lunch with a couple in the church, dear folks, and had a great time. Had some oysters. I love oysters. Bistro oysters, superb. They were from Canada, so they were Canadian oysters. They were spot on. But we were talking. We were just learning their story. They were learning our story and just getting to know each other. And she, Nan made the comment that she really enjoys Outlaw Radio. And I said, well, so what is it? And she goes, what I love about Outlaw Radio is that I really feel like through the process of listening to episodes, like I'm getting to know you guys. Because we're all part of the same church community, and she's part of our church community, but they're relatively new to our church. And just through the process of, like, she feels like she's gotten to know you guys. She's gotten to know Vinny. Elaine was on the show. Mm-hmm. We have people from our church on the show telling their stories because, again, there's power in stories. And I really think, like, just, again, it was a good reminder of one of, like, what is Outlaw Radio? What is our shtick, so to speak? And we talk about every episode is going to be something different. There's not, we don't necessarily make the show about politics, although we will talk about, things that maybe are happening within culture or, big item issues, we'll address those. But, every week there's something different that we're talking about. But at its core, one of the things that I think people really do enjoy is, like, they feel like they're participating in just like Christian community, a group of people getting together, talking about Jesus, being real, being honest, being even sometimes vulnerable. And that there's so much superficial Christianity, especially in, like, the American church. There are certain movements where, sometimes you feel like the church, it's a mile wide and it's only an inch deep. Which is why even, like, mega churches understand the importance of, like, small groups. Like, people have a longing to feel like they're connecting to something genuine and real and authentic. Even if there's, like, again, warts involved, at least, it's like, hey, I really feel like I'm getting to know these folks, and that there are Christians like me. And that if they can be vulnerable, if they can talk about these things, then so can I, and I can participate in this conversation, which is, again, it was just a healthy reminder yesterday having lunch of just what our show, I think, does, what it accomplishes. And we've been able to make some just incredible friendships along the way, from Josh Brown, who produced Outlaw Radio in its early days, to brothers like Seth Waters who've been on the show. We've had so many different guests, different people. We've developed a great community. And as a result, we've got people that are watching Outlaw Radio from all over the place. I think of our brother Walter, in South Africa, who watches not just Outlaw Radio, but he watches our Sunday service. I almost feel like we need to start, like, in the welcome at the church. We need to start, like, going through a list of people, like, hey, we want to welcome the Intricans down in Titusville, and we want to reach out to Walter, welcome you to church this morning. And the Norrises, I know you're in Mississippi. That's terrible for you guys, but welcome to, we've, and Isaac and Alexis up in Knoxville now. And the Lord has just kind of used our show and this small little thing to develop some very cool friendships and connections. And, the Snipes watch every week from Honduras. We are an intercontinental show.
Yeah,
Outlaw.
we're a big deal.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You look like you were chomping at the bit to say something there, Spice Daddy.
No, not really. I just do find it amazing that a lot of times I forget that we do this. a lot. You know, I'm literally here just to hang out with you guys, and
we throw some microphones and cameras up and just record it.
And a lot of people are like, yeah, I like the episode. I was like, I don't even remember what we talked about. I was just there for a good time.
Right.
And that's cool to me.
Yeah.
And the people that just get to ride along, I just wish they would comment more and join the conversation.
Yeah, hit us up.
It's also a really interesting medium because the technology to do this, you know, so like when we started Outlaw Radio, it was purely a radio show, and it was one microphone at my desk back here, no cameras, me recording 4 blocks of audio, sending them off to get produced, packaged, distributed out to radio stations. And then we would take whatever audio was produced and we would just duplicate it out as a podcast.
Basically re-edit it for a media that didn't have like commercial breaks and whatnot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like with radio, you have to have, like, if it's an hour-long show, that's 52 minutes. You have to have 4 blocks of audio that get sent to the radio stations because you have to have station IDs.
And you have to hit it down to like the second.
Down to the second. It's a whole thing. So like, and then we would take it, put all the audio back together, release it as a podcast. And that was the show for years. And there was really not like, I mean, kind of the pandemic really forced a lot of different technological advances, adapting to things. And, you know, we got to a point where it was like, okay, we're not really interested in doing radio anymore. And, you know, it was like, well, let's record the video. Remember, Creighton, we were recording the video and then packaging it together and releasing it.
Yes, I do remember that.
And then it was like, well, let's see if we can like live stream. And the fact that like we've got 4 cameras, 4 nice mics, we got multiple pieces of gear. Like God's blessed us with the right tools.
Yeah.
But the fact that you can do this and stream it, and that like internet speeds are high enough where that can work, and like we've crossed so many different hurdles. I just think it's such a unique thing we're doing. I think it's different. Again, we don't do a midweek service at the church, and in some ways, I mean, I wouldn't brand this a midweek, but this is kind of our middle of the week release of a Bible conversation, which is fun. So with all that being said, yeah,
basically anybody in the English speaking world can listen to this and enjoy it.
Yeah,
like, you don't have to have a big setup to be able to access it.
And AI means that you can probably listen to this not even in English. Like that there's translations for this.
You know,
which
probably
means,
could.
Yeah.
Which means it could pretty much translate anything I said, including an Amazon Christmas can be found on Amazon Prime.
That's
Go ahead and get it started for
get started. I mean, you're never
next year.
too early to stop shopping for Christmas.
Yeah.
Yes, that's true.
You know what I discovered about Creighton?
What?
I already got onto him for hating Christmas. You know what else he hates? Peanut butter and jelly.
What?
That's
Yes,
true.
that's what I said.
I don't eat
What?
raw peanut butter.
I hate to drop the ball on you like this.
No,
but
I mean,
this was
that's
an
just-
important thing that I needed.
I mean,
to
and we
bring up.
invited a guest on. We could have led with that.
It's just
Yeah,
been
I don't
eating
like
at me
raw
all
peanut butter.
weekend.
It sticks to the
and
roof
all
of your
week.
mouth. It sticks to your
That's
teeth.
why you have the jelly.
There's no.
You
not
might
a
have your
fan.
ratios wrong.
No,
I just don't like. I don't
bet
like
if you
raw
had
peanut
my-
butter or anything.
I bet if you
I
had,
don't like Reese's cups very much.
I bet if you had it on my
Because of
mother's
raw
bread,
peanut butter?
it would make a difference.
You know what? Maybe your mom's bread would. I've never had a peanut butter
little-
and jelly on your mom's bread.
Some rye, a little bit of butter,
Yeah.
and some peanut
What
butter.
was that sandwich that Elvis used to make? It was a fried peanut butter and jelly or something like that? Peanut butter and
What?
banana? Yeah.
Butter and
Banana.
banana, and he would fry it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super healthy. That's why he lived to a great old age. That Elvis character.
You know Elvis, known for being healthy.
Known for his health.
But he was happy.
Not really.
No,
Not
he
really. That's a whole
wasn't.
other topic. So hey, let's get to Mr. Steve Hamilton first. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Good, thank you.
You are working currently on you have a project you're working on for the Outlaw Radio Show. You want to disclose what you're working on, because you were looking around like, oh, we've got an upgrade coming.
Yeah, Zach, the platform that all of this stuff is perched on is
Creighton's got the wide shot up.
subpar, to say the least.
Okay, it's a 6-foot white table with spandex on it. So this was a placeholder until a friend of mine could retire and have time to make a nice wooden table. So the rumor is maybe by next week we will have a new table for Outlaw Radio, and Mr. Steve Hamilton is working on that presently, which is great. So this gives Steve a taste of the room so he can make sure the table does what it needs to. But Steve also has, so how long, I was trying to think about this. When did you and Debbie start coming to Calvary 316?
It's been almost 10 years ago now.
Wow.
Almost 10 years. So you guys started coming, this would have been
sometime in 85 or
15?
2015.
So we had only really been our own church for 2 years or so. So we were still kind of in the very early days of figuring out what in the world we were doing. And you stayed, which is just a testament to God's grace. I know, no doubt. So 10 years, wow. I got to say that, the Lord gives you the opportunity to have friendships, relationships. And I got to say, it's been a joy of mine. You travel a lot. I've traveled a lot for work. Your time is very valuable when you're in town. But Steve has always made a point for the last decade or so that every 2 months or so we've been able to grab lunch and stay connected. And you've made such an impact on my life in ways that I couldn't even express or know. But I've gotten to know you some, and you have such an inspiring walk with the Lord. You're successful in a secular sense. I would also say that I think you're successful in a spiritual sense. You and your wife have been married for how many years now?
47 and a half.
47 and a half, which is, again, a testament of God's grace. You outpunted your coverage with Debbie. There's no question. But you have 3 adult children that follow Jesus. You've got a whole bunch of grand. Tell us about. Let's start with your life right now, what your life looks like right now, and how God's blessed your life, and then we're going to go all the way back to the beginning, kind of work backwards. So start with just letting the audience know who you are, your family, what you did for a living. You've recently retired. I'm going to shut up and let you just kind of talk for a few.
Okay, well, I'll start with that point then. After a 45-year career as an environmental scientist for various companies, I retired this last September. Debbie and I, like Zach asked a minute ago, we've been married for 47 and a half years. I actually met in high school, got married while we were in college. We do have 3 adult children who are all in church, solid marriages, 9 grandchildren, one of whose birthday was day before yesterday, and the other one will be Friday. So
keeping track of all of that's a nightmare.
Yes. Yeah, don't ask me about anybody's birth dates other than those 2, because one of them falls on my birthday, so I remember.
So you can remember that one, at least for now. You can remember it, right?
Yeah. Let me see. After my career, in that travel, especially the last 25 years, I traveled extensively for the company I worked for, about 2 million miles on Delta.
That's incredible.
And I have not been on an airplane since I left, which has been great.
Which has been wonderful. Yeah. You said you were an environmental scientist. Did I get that right?
That's correct.
So what is that exactly? What does that entail? What is an environmental scientist? Because I've had people ask me, hey, what did Steve do for a living? I'm like, it's something with science and
it's
rocks.
It's on a need-to-know basis.
Right. Environmental science. How does one, what is that? How does one get into that? And I say that for a reason, because I do think that will come back to play a little bit with your story.
It does. Environmental science, basically, it's more or less an applied chemistry education. And it's studying the interaction of man with the environment, and more specifically with environmental pollutants, solvents, heavy metals, things like that, the effects they have on groundwater and on human health and the environment. My work for the companies I worked for was to ensure that they were in compliance with the various federal and state regulations, and then where problems had occurred, to find ways to fix them and to address the problem, do it as quickly as we could, ensuring human health and safety was protected along the ways. But My specialty over the years I would call myself the company janitor. Because partly because when I was in college, I was a janitor. But I would work on the cleanup sites, ones where, from years past, before regulations came about, where contamination had occurred. And then I would work on resolving that, cleaning the area up, bringing it back up to standards where it was safe for humans and or the environment.
Was that like when you were like 3 or 4 years old and you had, there were, some of your peers were like, I'm going to grow up and be a fireman, and I'm going to grow up and be a baseball player. And you're like, I'm going to grow up and be an environmental scientist.
Well, I started wanting to be a cowboy and then a fireman. I got to be a fireman. I got to be a seasonal firefighter for the Forest Service and Park Service. So I got that part.
Okay.
Is that where the mustache came about?
That came about as soon as high school football ended and I could grow a mustache.
And you've had the mustache your entire life. It's not like this is not a fad.
Since I was 17.
Yeah,
Good,
solid.
Good mustache.
That's a solid.
Thank you.
Tom Selleck and Steve Hamilton. 1A, 1B.
Yeah. No, I had, going back as long as I could remember, I had a fascination with the outdoors, the natural world, the mountains, plants, canyons, you name it. And as I grew and learned more and more, I got very interested in all the science behind it. Mm-hmm. And that's a large part of what led me into studying and ending up with 2 science degrees out of college, the environmental science and the other was botany. I got that because I love plants.
I didn't know you had a botany degree.
I have a botany degree, yes. And I can pronounce botany.
Botany. My grandfather was, he got his PhD. He got one from Oregon State University.
Big O was a doctor?
Not Big O. Big O had an 8th grade education. Okay. What are you talking about? The other side of the family. My mom's father, the Weldon side. He had a PhD from Oregon State, I'm pretty sure, and then he also had another degree, I think, from University of Wyoming in Laramie. But he had a marine biology degree, and was ended up. He was a marine biologist, worked for the government. They landed in Fort Lauderdale, and that's how he ended up dying. He was doing research in a pond and dove into a water moccasin nest. My mom was 10. He died in a tragic way, but like there's, just the love of nature and the study of plants. And I know a little bit about that just from a family history. My brother Nick has a degree, a weed degree, really, from the University of Georgia, turf grass management degree. When you were, where did you grow up? Let's maybe go back to there. Like where did the Hamiltons reside?
Okay, so I mostly grew up out on the Mojave Desert in Southern California, up until I was 19 and left after my freshman year of college, moved to Flagstaff, Arizona to attend Northern Arizona University.
Okay, people say the Mojave Desert, and that doesn't compute to a lot of people. Like, what was the environment like? You think Southern California, you don't think Mojave Desert. What was the town like? What was the environment like? I mean, this is eastern Southern California. This is
eastern
high
Southern
desert.
California, north of Los Angeles. On the other side of the mountains from LA is what they call a high desert. You could get snow there, up to 2 feet of snow, I can recall at times. Summer times, 105 degrees, 107 degrees.
Real brutal weather, wasn't it?
But no humidity.
No humidity.
So a definite advantage over the south.
Yes.
Windy in the spring, especially. Terrible wind, 55-mile-an-hour winds for 3-4 days straight. You replace your windshield every 3 or 4 years.
Wow. Okay.
But where I grew up, where I really spent a lot of time, we were 20 miles outside of town. These desert foothills, just these massive granite rock piles.
It's very remote. Like it's pretty sparse, isn't it? It's kind of rural in that sense.
My 8th grade graduating class had 13 people.
Okay. Of which Debbie was one?
No.
Okay.
Debbie was a town girl.
A town girl.
Yeah.
You were the wild, rural stallion out there in the Mojave.
My dad was what you would say very antisocial, wanted to be far away from people, and so he moved us out to this very remote area.
Now, you had siblings. What was your family life like?
I was the youngest of three, have two older sisters. My father, most of the time, was a juvenile probation officer. And my mom worked at a hospital. It's kind of a dysfunctional family environment, if you will. My father was an alcoholic. My mom, more or less, an enabler of that. And my father, although a brilliant man, was frustrated. He is a super talented athlete all through high school and college, but due to injuries was unable to continue that.
Right.
And I think buried a lot of that through alcohol.
Were you close in age to your siblings? You said you were the youngest. Were you close in age, or was there an age gap?
Oldest sister is 4 years older.
Okay.
The middle sister, she's 18 months different from
So
me.
very close.
Yeah.
You said dysfunctional family. Aside from, what you said about your father and your mother, if she was a nurse, she's working crazy hours too, right?
She worked medical records. She wasn't.
Okay, so she wasn't. Okay, so was it a Christian home? Did you guys go to church? Was there a bit of a religious element to it, or was it just very secular?
No. Although my parents were both raised in the church, the only times I can only remember being in church 3 times growing up, and twice were for funerals.
Like the entirety of childhood up through high school, there was only 3 times. So the church was not a thing.
That's correct.
Did you know anything about the Lord? Did you know? I mean, was it like, what was your exposure? Okay, you didn't go to church, but did you have any exposure, or what's that like? Because that's such a foreign thing for me. Because I mean, I grew up in the church. Church has always been part of my life. To hear that, like, I can't even really kind of process what that is. Help me understand. Like, did you know anything about Jesus? Was there any exposure to the God? Like, how was that? Or was it just like, I really didn't know anything?
No, I really didn't know anything.
Okay.
We about the only things my parents would ever say were typically the thing you still hear a lot of is a lot of hypocrites. And they would talk about their own parents as being very hypocritical. So I had this jaundiced view of anyone that went to church that expressed the belief in God. I like to debate or argue, and I'll take the opposite side just for fun.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I grew up, first of all, with my bent towards science, I felt that through science, we eventually would get the answers to all the questions. It's just a matter of time. And that was one of the things about science, is you could go investigate all these things.
Now, how old are you now?
Junior high?
No, like presently. Today.
I will be 69 on Friday.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Happy
69.
birthday.
Well, yeah, early happy birthday.
Thank you.
And I would not have guessed that. I would not have guessed that at all. So, like, growing up,
The mustache makes you look young.
So you're talking about, like, your high school years were early 70s?
That's correct. I graduated in 74.
So that gives, and you're in California. There's a lot of things happening in California as well, but you're kind of in that first wave of, there's a lot of scientific advancements happening. There's a lot of challenging of religious norms. Like, there's a culture that you're also in that's kind of swirling around a young Steve Hamilton, who then is looking at science, and doesn't have any religious background. And so you were kind of hostile even to theism. Yes, no. I mean, you said you were debating.
Absolutely. I figured that most of the people who had a belief of any sort in something that they could not see, touch, feel, was just stupidity.
And you'd let people know that.
I would let people know that. I would argue, and in my looking back in my conceit, I felt like I won most of those arguments in trying to get Christians, and most of them, honestly, were young Christians. Or myself, they're high school kids. But
they don't have the answers to all of the questions either. They different contexts.
But it did lead me to something that I've kept all the years since then, and that is how essential it is as a Christian to be able to articulate your belief and to be able to express it to others. Because when you talk with someone else who doesn't believe, someone like I was, it's not going to do any good, to, my opinion, to spout a lot of Bible verses. They're not going to remember them anyway. The thing that has to be done is, what is the difference in your life? How did this change me personally? Of course, adding, biblical scripture where appropriate, but emphasizing that change in your life and why it was important and why it's a good thing for them to do as well.
It's, I've in times past when you're dealing with like the apologetic world where you're sharing your faith, you're actually going, I can remember going out right after September 11th. I was in Bible college. We would go to Oceanside, which had this combination of the Marines and the Arabs. It was very, very explosive the several weeks after September 11th. Yeah, people getting thrown off the end of the pier. And we decided to go street evangelize, share our faith just by having conversations. I learned a lot about things, the way to do it and way not to do it. And, if you can't, like for some people, in the beginning, God created. If we can't start there, I can tell you about Jesus till I'm blue in the face. But like, if you don't believe in a God and you don't believe, like there are some basic building blocks that have to be laid first for if someone doesn't believe in sin, then they don't see a need for a savior, and the sales pitch of Jesus doesn't make any sense. So like, I'm 100% with you about taking the right approach. And a lot of that is the person. Sometimes you can cut through the BS and know, like, you're just arguing with me. Let's get to the real issue here. So you're a teenager. You're smart. You're intelligent. You've got an interest in science. Let's pause a little there, because you had mentioned that Debbie was kind of a high school sweetheart. So bring Debbie into the story a little bit. Was she a believer when you met her?
Well, yes. And of course, high school sweetheart, we started dating a month before we graduated.
Still high school sweetheart.
Still counts.
You made it in under the gun.
Yeah. Yeah, she was a believer. She is one of what I consider one of the fortunate ones who has always felt like the Lord was present in her life. And we went together for a while. I broke off our relationship and moved away to Arizona at that point in time. But yeah, she was a believer at that time.
Were you trying to argue her out of that, or was there still something like, I'm going to respect this? Like, it's a weird thing to start dating a gal that is a believer when you're like not. Like, what was your vantage point with that?
Oh, I think she was just highly tolerant of me.
Okay. Right.
And as an aside, she's very tall. I'm 1 inch taller than her, so that was an advantage. She wanted to go with a guy who was taller than her.
And there wasn't a lot of options. Like, it was process of elimination. Well, that guy, he's growing a good mustache, and he's an inch taller than me.
So I left, moved to Arizona, got immersed in the university, heavily into the science classes. But as time went by, as had more and more science classes, I just had this, dawning feeling that, the more questions, the more answers we find, they just lead to more questions. And
can I ask you a question about the science classes?
Yes.
Because my degrees were science-ish based. When I was in undergrad, half the classes I took, they spent like a whole 2 or 3 weeks beginning trying to debunk the Bible. Was that the same back then, or did they just not even mention it?
Never mentioned.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I had a high school teacher, the only one who ever said anything connected at all. He said, I go to a Baptist church and I have to teach evolution. Figure that one out.
Okay.
I just thought that would, like, that's a lot what shaped my belief systems. Is I intentionally went there, but like all the classes I took, they spent usually about a week or two, like
militantly attacking
Christianity and the Bible. So I didn't know if it was the same back then or if academia has changed so much since your time
back
period.
Back in the dawn of time.
Back in the dawn of time.
Not necessarily, but like it just seems like, why would you focus on attacking one aspect of?
You don't ever hear them go after the Muslim theologies.
Yeah, but like I just didn't know if that's always been a thing from my experience, or if it went all the way back to your experiences in college.
Yeah, no, it was not an issue. It didn't come up. I should say.
So you're in these science classes, and it wasn't like you were having some grand revelation of Jesus.
No,
but it was more of like just with your own analytical thinking, your own way of processing science, and you're very interested in it. Again, like you said, like every question leads to an answer that leads to more questions.
Correct.
And that was stirring something in you.
Yeah. And then along that path, I was doing a lot of technical rock climbing. I did a lot of rock climbing for a number of years. And
like that, wait, like I got it. So like when you say technical rock climbing, I mean, what's the movie Vertical Horizon or whatever? There's like rock climbing movies.
Free Solo.
Like where you got like the powder on your fingers and like you're hanging off the side of cliffs with your mustache, skinny Steve Hamilton, belaying cliffs, the whole thing.
Yeah, and although,
I didn't know this at all.
Although I never climbed in Yosemite, but if you picture the cliffs in Yosemite,
was it El Capitan? Is that
like that? Okay, that was the kind of climbing I was doing.
That's
That's awesome, but it's not surprising after your mustache and all.
I know it actually it makes sense.
It fits.
Yes,
and then you have to do that kind of thing to have that kind of mustache.
That's true.
Yeah. Well, you got to have something to keep you on the wall.
Right.
Well, the question is, it's really a chicken and an egg debate. Mm-hmm. Does the rock climber have the mustache, or does the mustache lead to the rock climbing? Like it's
right.
No, I started climbing in junior high. I lived way out in the desert in these huge granite rock piles, so that's where I got in.
Rock climbing caused the mustache.
That's what happened.
Yeah. Yep.
You were either going to be a cop,
a firefighter,
or a scientist,
or a rock climber.
A rock climbing scientist. Anyway, I just got caught off guard on the picturing Steve. Yeah, welcome to the Outlaw Radio Show. Just Steve, rock climbing is just such an incredible. So you're rock climbing. Let's get back there.
And how to phrase this? I'm a very good climber, but careless. And my carelessness, my overconfidence caused me to take a couple of chances. I ended up taking a pretty good fall, breaking my neck, spending several weeks in the hospital.
Oh, my.
Dropping out of college for a while.
So what, like you said you took a risk and you broke your neck. There's a story there. Give us the story. Like what happened? What was the scenario? Because I was going to crack the joke. You've met a good rock climber when they're there.
All I'm thinking now is like Mission Impossible-esque where he's hanging and he like jumps to a
So let's get a picture. Like paint us the picture of what happens here.
Well, it was a lead climb.
What's that? What's a lead climb?
You're the one.
You're the leader.
Yeah, you're the
setting
one
the clips for everybody else.
Setting the clips. It was a 600-foot rock face, and we were towards the end of it. And it hadn't been a particularly satisfying climb, and I just kind of like, let's get out of here. And the rock was loose. There's a lot of loose, and there wasn't a good place to put any protection in. And my partner kept on saying, hey, you need to put something in. And I said, it's all rotten. And instead of backing off like I should have, I kept on. And I don't remember the actual fall because I took, pretty good head blow. But my partner basically said a chunk of rock the size of a truck with me attached to it came down. And
so you were lucky to survive
goodness.
that.
yes.
You've just made Creighton's fear of heights even more.
I am terrified of heights. That sounds horrible.
Yeah. A 6-foot ladder for Creighton to adjust the cameras at Calvary 316 is as high as he's ever going to go.
You know
This is
what?
why his
Speaking of
mustache isn't as good as...
It's true. It's true.
I was setting the cameras this Sunday, and you know who happened to walk into church at the time? Larry Parkin. He started shaking the ladder. I did not do well. I am not a heights guy.
So you suffered an injury where you should have died, and you even recognized, like, yeah, I did something dumb. My hubris, my ego, this was a poor decision. And like you said, you ended up having to drop out of college. You're in the hospital. You broke your neck. Pick it up from there.
I didn't, that wasn't the transitional moment that like, oh, okay, God, I'm sorry.
Right.
But it was like,
It was a moment.
what are you doing?
Yeah.
And what have you been doing? And where are you going? And that time was beneficial, providential. Debbie and I ended up getting back together again and starting our relationship back up. And back in the university then the next semester, into classes, still with all of these fundamental questions, that I can't get rid of. Cause and effect. How do all these interrelationships work?
Can you give me an example of one of those questions? Like just like a deep question that you kept coming back to. Like one of those things that just stuck with you. Just an example.
Silly things. Why is the sky blue?
Okay.
How did the colors become the colors? There's explanations for it, but I start thinking about things like that. So spring break, I'm on a backpack trip in the Grand Canyon. And I get up real early in the morning before the sun comes up. I've always had an interest in photography. I wanted to get pictures inside the canyon of the sun coming up. And it was there April 17th, 1977, I remember. Sitting on the edge of one of the cliffs of the inner canyon, watching the colors change as the sun came up. And it's just, it's amazing.
If you haven't been to the Grand Canyon to see that, it's worth the trip itself.
Yeah. Should be on everybody's life list.
Yes.
And watching all that happen, it finally occurred to me, it's like, there is no way that all of this could have happened on its own, spontaneously or anything else. There is a plan behind it. And, I still didn't know anything about Christ, but my totally emotional moment at the time was, or thought at the time was, all right, God, if you're out there, I'll give you a chance. Nothing more than that. But it was the things that started happening after that were pretty cool. Hiked out of the canyon. Next day, back in my dorm room at the university, I woke up and I was laying there and I was thinking, well, I guess if I'm going to be serious about this Christianity stuff, I should probably get a Bible or something to read it. Got up, got dressed.
You say that just very nonchalantly, but knowing you, it's like, I can completely see that. You're like, well, okay. Step one, Bible.
Yeah. Some of us are OCD.
It's a good first step, though. I mean, to be honest.
Solid.
Yeah.
I'm walking down to the cafeteria to get breakfast, and here comes the guy walking along, said, hey, you want a Bible? And he passes out a Bible. And I'm like, yeah, sure.
I was looking for one.
And then after that, it was like, wow, maybe there's something to this prayer stuff. And years later, I ran across a quote from C.S. Lewis where he said, my friends told me my answered prayers were merely coincidence. But when I stopped praying, the coincidences stopped happening.
Right. Yeah. It's a great quote.
Yeah. And it was from there that my journey as a Christian really began at that point in time.
You said you were back together with Debbie.
Mm-hmm.
When did you tell her of, I mean, there's a big moment in your life. Had to have been a moment for her.
Yeah, I think she was happy.
Yeah.
Especially because, when we first got engaged, when we decided we were going to get married, I still was not a Christian at that point in time, which several times she says, yeah, it's a good thing you did, because I'm not sure I would have gone through with it.
So she had been praying for you behind the scenes.
Yeah, she had her sister, her mom, her brother-in-law, bunch of other people who were too stubborn to quit.
Yeah. The power of providential prayer.
Yes. We got married while we were still in college, spent another 2 years in college together, graduated, went out, got my first professional job.
Pause there. I want to go back just for, I want to address a little bit of a season because I think it's interesting. I was struck by your story and just thought of the passage in Romans chapter 1. Paul writes, beginning with verse 18, he says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who suppress the truth in unrighteousness, because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them." And then he says, "For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse." And just like within your story, I think it's such an interesting thing that, like, it wasn't someone that led you to Jesus. Like, it wasn't like, someone came along and said, "Steve, you want to pray the sinner's prayer." It wasn't in the hospital when you just almost died and you're recovering. And, it wasn't a conversation with Debbie. It wasn't at a church. It wasn't, an invitation at a crusade to come on down. It was you sitting on the edge. Like, it was first asking questions, seeking for truth, trying to be open to where questions lead, and then and then obviously lots of prayer behind you and the Holy Spirit and God doing his thing. But sitting there in the Grand Canyon, watching the colors change, like you were converted by his invisible attributes being clearly seen by you. Like you exemplify. I just think that's a powerful thing to point out, especially for someone that's like been praying for a friend that they might come to know the Lord, and like God will reach somebody anywhere, and he'll use even unconventional ways. And for you, again, I just think it's how did I give my life to Jesus? I saw the sun rise in the Grand Canyon, and I looked around and I thought, okay, Jesus, I see you. Like, I mean, I'm not putting words in your mouth, but that's what you're saying, right? Essentially,
yeah. And it's interesting, you read that verse from Romans, because that little Bible that was given to me, and not knowing anything about it, and I'm flipping through, and then this one says, Acts, and it's kind of a historical. Well, I'll start there.
Yeah.
So I get up to Acts 17, where Paul is in Athens.
Yeah. The unknown God.
Yeah. And he's walking around and he says, "I see you guys are pretty religious. You have temples for everybody. And I even found this one that says, 'To an unknown God.' Let me tell you about him."
Right.
And in that, where it said that God appointed the rise and fall of all the nations and the peoples, my paraphrase, not that they would look towards man, but that they would look for God. Mm. And having read a lot of history over the years, and you read about the rise and fall of all the nations, it's like, wow, that really makes sense. And then from Acts, I moved over, Romans is the next thing.
Yep.
First chapter, and I hit that verse in Romans 1:19. It's like, wow.
That was me.
Yeah, that was me.
So my follow-up question to that, or follow-up observation, is just because you were sitting there on this like you had a moment with God, that didn't mean that your questions were all answered.
Of course not.
I mean, in fact, probably none of them are answered except for just the biggest one, and that was, okay, God, I get you. But it wasn't like you didn't have to have all of your questions answered to accept Jesus. You hadn't. What's the old saying that, like, I don't need, like, I need enough evidence to make faith reasonable. But I don't, you know, like the accusation is like faith exists in the absence of reason. It's like, no, I have enough evidence to make my faith very reasonable. That doesn't mean all my questions are answered. I now have like a new direction to seek truth and seek answers. So like, I just, for someone out there thinking, hey, I have all these questions, these existential questions, and I give my life to Jesus, and like, I still have these questions. Like, yeah, that's okay. Like, that's all right. Now what do you do next? And like, you started searching for more answers, right?
Yeah.
That was why getting a Bible was a big thing. Like, okay, I should start here. The book matters.
Yeah. And one of the other, beyond the Bible, the other thing that has really helped the way I think is I love C.S. Lewis's writings. Mm-hmm. He's very analytical. He's very, building block.
We're all fans.
But where he starts out with a simple premise that you walk up to a total stranger, the other part of the world, who's been totally separated from everything, slap them across the face. They know they've been wronged. Where does that sense of right and wrong come from? And from that, he builds his whole case for Christianity is that there has to be a single moral authority.
The moral lawgiver argument, right?
Yeah. And that made and makes perfect sense to me is because otherwise it's all opinion. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So those two things.
How did it work? How did it work becoming a Christian and still being in the scientific world? You were still 2 more years in university. Not exactly the friendliest environment. How did you kind of navigate that? What were some of the challenges that you encountered in that process?
Well, strangely, it wasn't the adversarial place you would think it was at that point in time. It was much more open. There were a lot of other Christians in the sciences. Of course, had a real issue with evolution.
Right.
But it was not an adversarial thing with any of the professors that I had. In fact, a couple of them were Christians themselves. So, did
you find a church to plug in? Like, what helped with your early Christian development?
Well, and after a while, there was kind of a lull. When we took that first job, we were in a very remote location. The only church that was there was basically salvation, 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 salvation.
You got saved every Sunday.
Yeah.
And you're like, wait, I got saved a while ago.
And no real growth. After being there for 6 years, I took a job in a new place. And although it was a community that was heavily a Mormon community, a lot of Native Americans, I ended up being in office with 2 other Christians. My boss was a Christian. And one day I came home after work, and my wife said, hey, the couple across the street invited us to their midweek Bible study. And I was like, oh boy, doesn't that sound like fun?
Fun. Yeah, right. With the neighbors.
Yes. But it turned out to be one of the greatest growth experiences of my life, because that was the first time I really had someone to lead me through the Bible.
Yeah. Guide, to teach.
Yeah.
Encourage, mentor. Right.
Yeah. And we became fast friends. The woman and my wife are still best friends ever. Our kids all grew up together. So, some very strong relationships built. But it was that need to get into regular study of the Bible and find out what the heck it really says.
Yeah. You had mentioned, so one of the things that led to me inviting you on the show is we did, on the 5th of January, we did at Calvary 316, we call it an Ebenezer service. Before we move to the next year, we take some time, look back on the previous year, set up some milestones. Steve had a big year last year, retiring and the fulfillment of a long career, and then going and burying your mom and dad, their ashes, and taking a trip and visiting some old friends, going down memory lane. But you made a comment in it that really hit me, because I had not heard it, is that when you gave your life to Jesus, it really did come with some very real consequence relationally with your family. Like, they weren't exactly, I think it might be an understatement to say they weren't exactly supportive. You want to kind of pick that up and explain a little bit of, because I think that there are people out there that have given their life to Jesus, or are thinking, and they're weighing the cost, and they know that following Jesus doesn't mean that you're accepted by all men, and that there can be a real rejection of family that comes as a result.
Yeah. Initially, it was with my parents, who I had already had a strained relationship with anyway, because the growing up circumstances. That was just kind of another wedge in that relationship, moving me farther away from them. And, over the years, I could at least talk with my dad about Christianity. But my mom was just a solid, total wall, it's all ridiculous. I don't want anything to do with it. And then...
and she was always that way?
Yes.
That never changed?
That never changed.
Okay.
It never changed. And then with both my sisters, I've been rejected by both of them. And while they would probably say, well, no, it wasn't because you were a Christian, but it's that change in lifestyle.
Yeah.
It's that change in life and outlook, and that change that Christ has made in me that created this distance that they rejected me for.
Yeah.
But, it's like Paul says, it's, I've lost those things, but I've gained so much more.
Yeah, amen.
Did your
dad ever come around at all? You said that you would have conversations with him. You said your mom didn't.
Yeah. My father at one point said that when he was in high school at a church camp, that he went forward at that point in time. And he was honest, at least says, I don't know if I genuinely went forward on my own, or if it's because all my friends were there.
Yeah.
So at least he admitted that. My mom, again, total wall, always, no matter how you would broach the subject with her. When you're dead, you're dead.
We don't have to go here if you don't want to, but I am going to kind of push a little, because I did mention, and I didn't even put it all together until now, that part of you taking this trip this summer was that over the last few years, both your mom and dad have passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a family plot. You want to tell a little bit about that story? It's a funny story, but it's also a heavy story in light of what you've just said about your parents. And I'm going to go someplace, but let's have a little brevity and kind of explain that.
Okay, so
the fun nature of that.
My father passed away a few years ago, was cremated. My mother held on to the ashes. She passed away this past summer, also was cremated. Her wish was for their ashes to be buried in this little country cemetery in southeast Kansas, where her great-grandparents, my great-great-grandparents, had homesteaded back in the 1870s. And it took a while to find anybody who had any association with this cemetery.
So first you got to find the cemetery. You got to know where it is. And then you got to what's the next step to do this?
Yeah, and especially because of what I did as a career, a heavily regulated environment. It's like, oh, okay, I'm going to have to do all kinds of hoops.
There's going to be forms to fill out. I'm going to have to grease the wheels here, the whole bit.
So I finally get a hold of someone who's got some control over that cemetery, and I explained what's going on. I said, so I need to bury my parents' ashes there. What do I need to do? So, well, the first thing you need to do is you have to have a family connection, or else you're going to have to buy a plot. And I said, well, my grandparents are buried there, an uncle, one set of great-grandparents, one great-great. And he goes, oh, and I said, so what do I need to bring? Oh, that's good. That's you just prove the connection.
Don't need documentation.
And I said, okay, what do I need to do to actually inter their ashes? Well, bring a shovel, dig a hole about 2 foot deep, and put a marker over the top. And if you can't dig the hole, well, Cliff, he runs the motor grader in that part of the county, and he does the weed whacking out there. He can dig the hole for you. So, and I'm
no regulations, no groundwater studies.
Yeah, and it's like that. Just dig the hole. Says, yep, dig the hole.
Bring a shovel.
So that's what Debbie and I did. A hot September day in southeast Kansas, a little 2-acre cemetery, and found my grandparents' grave and dug a 2-foot hole next to that, placed my parents' ashes in it. It was the two of us and our shelties for the whole funeral service.
Just in light of it all, what was that like? Doing that. Again, that's not them, but that's got to be a very heavy moment.
It was, and I really couldn't think of anything to say. Debbie prayed for a minute. The only thing I could think of was God's mercies endure forever.
Yeah.
And just, hoped and prayed that somehow, somewhere in my parents' lives, that they had made a decision.
But there was a moment.
We'll find out in heaven.
So you've been walking with Jesus now for how many years? A few.
Well, 47, just about.
So you just retired. You've been following Jesus for a long time. But retirement, you don't retire from your walk with Jesus.
Yeah.
So we've talked about, in a person's testimony, like you even opened, it's your story with Jesus. Like the life leading up to it's really not the story. It's I was lost. That was it. And then I was found. And now let me tell you everything that Jesus has done in my life. 69, retired. What are you looking forward to Jesus doing in this next season of your life? I know you've thought about that, but what's the...
Well, more, one of the things is because my career was so absorbing, with all the travel I had to do, it was hard to do anything outside of work.
Right.
You just could never really disconnect. I've always liked teaching, and I hope to teach some more. Debbie and I have hosted a small group. For the 25 years we've been in Georgia, we've been leading a small group.
Because that made a big impact in your life, and so that's the manifestation of it.
Absolutely.
And it keeps you in the Word on its own, too.
It forces me
to
study because by nature I consider myself a lazy individual. But it forces me to study and get into the Word on a regular basis.
The need, like the discipline of feeding others, forces you to eat yourself, for sure. So there's more of that. I'm sure there's time with Debbie, and there's time catching up with grandkids.
And then we've got 9 grandchildren, 5 of them overseas in Taiwan.
That you hadn't seen in a while.
That we haven't seen in quite a while, and hope to see next month.
You going to Taiwan?
Yes.
Ooh, about to
Yeah. And one of
to go to the original General So chicken restaurant.
yeah.
You can tell him this off air.
I'm
General
sorry.
So chicken there is
Oh, it's
different thing than here, that's for sure.
Sorry, I get excited.
I know you just piqued Spice Daddy's
yeah.
interest.
Well, in fact, one thing, and it'd be a prayer request. When I was working for the company, I had a young woman working for me out of one of our Canadian offices. She was Hindu from India.
The Canadian office, that's the 51st state, right?
Yeah. Brilliant young engineer, spoke 7 languages. So I was kind of mentored her for 5 years or whatever. And in a work environment, it's hard to witness directly.
Yeah.
And so my prayer was always if I could influence her somehow. Well, so we got invited to her wedding in February. And so Debbie and I are flying to India in February to go to their wedding as honored guests. And
what an opportunity.
And the honored guest is expected to speak at the wedding ceremony. So it's what to say.
You're chewing on that, right?
Without causing an international incident.
Right.
Or and not getting thrown out of the country.
Right.
And yet having an impact.
Amen. Well, we'll be praying for that, and you'll have to at some point at least swing through and give us a report on how that goes, or at least give it to me, and I'll pass it along. So, Outlaw Radio audience, we got to be praying for Steve, and it's a trip in February, and praying that the Lord would give him wisdom in that. Before we wrap up, anything online? I didn't get anything through the text where that was relevant, but
I missed one from Miss Ann. She said, "Good evening." Hey, Miss Ann.
Hey,
thank you.
Miss Ann.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's about it.
Anything on X? Nothing good. All right. You guys have any questions before we wrap things up and roll out? Cray?
No,
Spice?
I thought that was a great episode. I really enjoyed listening to your story.
Thank you.
You feel like you know Steve a little more?
Absolutely.
I'm still trying to get over the rock climbing. I'm gonna have to process that.
You know what makes way more sense to me now? Do you remember when we went to his house to go fishing and his garden is just massive on the side of his house? He has a botany degree.
There's
That makes sense now.
and it's the 2-story. He climbs the rock face. That's how he gets
also
up.
makes
He doesn't
sense.
use the stairs.
Just climbs the outside
He just
of the
climbs
house.
the outside of the house, making his way up.
Also makes sense because he built that little playground in the church with the rock wall.
With the rock wall. That's also.
Yeah, you know what? I want to make one last comment.
Yes,
You
please.
mentioned about botany with my degree and the dual major that I had. One of the most influential classes I had was ecology, and it was talks about the interrelationship of fungi and bacteria and plants and rocks and everything, just how the interrelationships you see between them all. And I mentioned I was the kind of the cleanup guy for the company, and bioremediation or phytoremediation is what I enjoyed more than anything else, because it was the awareness, the understanding that God has made all these plants, all these things that can be used to resolve a lot of these problems. And that was one of the coolest things, was be able to implement those in a real world context.
Like God does his own cleanup.
Yeah, he's got all the tools. It's just a matter of finding which ones work best for this.
So, that's actually, Creighton is like glowing over here because he's super into
I love
plant.
biology. Was
Yes.
my thing. I grew up loving insects and bugs and all that kind of stuff. I love that stuff.
So what we should do is we'll have when Steve gets back from India, let's have him on, and let's craft an episode talking about how we see God in the natural world and those those interactions. I think we could do a whole episode that'd be very interesting. But this is going to
I
kind of
would
be
like
more of
that a
your down your lane than mine.
Yes, I think we should absolutely do that. Sounds like
Would
a
you
lot
be
of fun.
interested in coming back and talking about some of this fun stuff?
And we can work off the new table.
And we can absolutely
Yes.
work off the new table. You got anything else, Spice?
No, I really appreciate the story. I mean, just because it kind of, the academic side of things really matched what I was a believer beforehand, but like it really matched my life, I guess. So
Well, you saw the invisible attributes already knowing God, and it deepened your faith.
right, but it was challenged in school by those things. So.
Well, hey, this was a great episode. If you wouldn't mind rolling us out with a little bit of music, I'll close us down. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, the Outlaw Radio Show. Steve, again, thank you so much for being with us. If you are watching, we're so glad. Check out the podcast. Gets released tomorrow, Apple, Google, Spotify. If you're listening and have never joined the live stream, Wednesday nights, 8 o'clock, please come join us, put a face to the voice, be part of the show, interact. We would appreciate that. So if you're watching, check out the podcast. If you're listening, check out the live stream. With all that being said, may God bless you. We'll see you guys this time next week.